Well, thank you, Minister. You've traversed quite a deal of country there in your presentation, but certainly I think some of your announcements about the forward agenda in your portfolio areas are of particular interest to many of the people in the room here. Again, questions please. Down the front, I have the first question down very front. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Adrian Piani from AECOM. Question around energy security and the renewable industry then. It's quite topical a couple of weeks ago, but hasn't been mentioned today. I imagine energy and the environment's got main carriage of whatever might be going on, but it strikes me that your portfolio could have a lot to say in terms of innovation, the engineering solutions that will be required, like it may be an infrastructure solution that's required. So how does your department or portfolio play in that kind of space?
So, thanks, Adrian. So obviously I'm completely engaged in the energy security space. You're right that Josh Frydenberg, now that he has energy and environment, has the principal lead, but dealing with issues such as Ariam or in Whyalla or Near Star, in Port Pirie, or industry anywhere which requires reliable energy is fundamentally part of my role. So we have three objectives with energy policy. One is you've got to keep the lights on, and that's fairly basic for families, for hospitals, but for something as simple as a fish wholesale business, when the electricity goes out, they lose their refrigeration. You can see a business lose $30,000 in stock. It then becomes an insurance nightmare. Who's responsible? Are they covered? And then it flows through to the Paran fish markets in Victoria. So it's a real-world consequence. So number one is keeping the lights on energy security. Then you have cost and affordability, something that I've been deeply engaged in, and you have emissions reduction. I guess the point on emissions reduction, we're currently on track to beat our 2020 targets by minus 78 million tonnes. So we'll meet and beat our 2020 targets. And knowing the trajectory of those figures, which were always based on the worst case, because my instruction to the department when I was there was, you prepare the numbers, a best case, a mid-range and a worst case, and we always take the worst case, but we are likely to continue to improve. So I think we'll beat our targets by well north of 100 million and possibly a lot more than that for 2020. We'll also beat our 2030 targets. I have absolutely no doubt about that. So we're making good progress on the emissions reduction front. It will be minus 26 to minus 28, and then we're well placed for any review the review which will come in 2020 at the global level, and the review of national targets 2025. So knowing that we are doing that we're meeting and beating targets, and we're the second highest per capita amongst the OECD countries in terms of emissions reduction from the base that we inherited. Knowing that, you then say, well, what is it that we should be delivering on energy security? And the answer is, I think there are two things. One, there should be a very simple single national renewable energy target. I've argued that for a very long time, from opposition through government in the environment portfolio to the current situation, because individual state-based targets simply transfer the activity between states if there's an existing national RET. So it's much better to have a single national RET. The second thing is, with the change in reliability which comes from intermittent generation, there has to be, and this is what we commissioned last Friday through COAG, a national plan, because the states wouldn't do it, for genuine energy stability. That means to deal with the fact that some of the renewables, and I'm a big supporter of renewables, but some of the intermittent renewables are not what are called synchronous. The hydro is arguably the most synchronous of all of the sorts, and therefore the most viable for starting or maintaining systems at points of flexibility. So that's a combination of the transmission equipment. It's a combination of making sure we have base load that is flexible, and it's also something that I have raised, about the interconnectors between states. And I do think that the Tasmanian interconnector in particular, a second interconnector, is extremely important because it will drive the opportunity for using the intermittents with the Tasmanian dams to have dispatchable energy. So I think they become the key things going forward.
The Minister used to be responsible for the environment. Up the back, thank you.
Sorry.
Menezes is from the Queensland Competition Authority and the University of Queensland. My question is about competition, right? So we've seen an increase in market concentration, therefore a decrease in competition across different sectors in different countries, for example, in the USA. Is this a concern, especially given the connection between competition and innovation?
So look, you can have new concentrations and new monopolies that come from the digital era, but on balance, I'd say that there are more opportunities for competition in a world where young people can create their own businesses. Let me take an example. In the financial services sector, I think that you will find that there is increasing competition going forward. A couple of examples. Tyro. Tyro is both a Sydney incubator on the one hand, but it's also a financial services business on the other. It has a banking licence which was issued to it. It's now, I think, got a turnover of about 100 million. It's probably going to grow at a dramatic rate. And my suspicion is that you will see firms such as that begin to provide virtual banks which will challenge very significantly the incumbents. Our job is to make that as possible and as easy as it can be. So to allow that competition, that's the way. And in a similar sense, in a global environment, you're going to have an equal opportunity for players from outside, and we have to be very open to that. As a second example, in the financial services sector, I went to a Sydney incubator. I saw Spaceship. So this is a now whether I'm not warranting any business over another business, but this is an example of a startup superannuation business in an area that's notoriously hard to get into because of inertia. Young people, there were four young founders who had experience both on the digital side but also on the financial services side. They are creating a long-run superannuation business for people to invest in in the emerging technology side. So it's aimed in particular at investors in their 20s and 30s, building a platform and a portfolio. So I think that there are huge opportunities for competition, and this is also where the universities and the startups come in. The University of Wollongong, they've built a
great example.
Yes, just hypothetically, one that I picked out of the box. So University of Wollongong has built their incubator, and they've got young people going from the university to be building new businesses off, for example, their neurobiology research. They have incredible scientific research at the moment around biomedical growth of new spinal cords, just unbelievable. So people with paraplegia and quadriplegia who, in a 10 or 15-year period might be able to have a new spinal cord implanted, almost probably grown, and then they've got businesses that are building off it. So the researchers are then being twinned up. So that's where the real competition is, and that's why I've become extremely focused on the fact that we haven't had ever a national precinct policy, and we announced our first precinct task force with the the University of Newcastle on Wednesday of last week for their Gosford Medical School, and then to build on the medical school to create a precinct, and that's going to challenge existing businesses.
You should see the advanced manufacturing at the University of Wollongong too, Minister.
We did.
Yeah, come back again.
The robotics and welding.
I have time for one final question. Thank you.
Minister, thank you. Emmanuel Alfieris from the Commonwealth Bank. I'm keen to take you back to the macro discussion you were talking about and the next wave of trade agreements.
Yes.
and commentary that you might have. In fact, the previous speaker quoted the Prime Minister talking about creeping protectionism and what role you can see innovation and relationships across geopolitical partners to help facilitate more open trade versus receding into more protectionist environment.
So I think, there are plenty of examples around the world of political leaders who are arguing to pull up the drawbridge. You can think of one or two, I suspect. And that is a losing hand. Now, there's no way to convey that argument if you're doing it at a theoretical level. So when you look at the car industry, that's an example where, for better or worse, we weren't competitive. And I'm not pointing fingers or laying blame. That was a accreting historic case going forwards, and I think many people foresaw it and none were able to avoid it. But at the same time, when I look at BlueScope, where they went from a $300 million loss to a $300 million profit, that was a series of different forms of innovation and partnership between management and workers. And
Also in Wollongong.
it was in Wollongong, and it was on the same trip 3 weeks ago. Yeah. So, and the point about that is they had the people in the white coats doing the R&D, building a better zinc aluminum finish, building a thinner a thinner form of coating for their advanced paint products. And they had branded products. They've created something special. So the way to protect the jobs on the factory floor is by innovation, because if we try to close the door, A, you won't ever be able to do it in a completely digital world. But B, all that would happen is that in the end, that's a guarantee that those jobs will be lost. So the only way to protect and to create the new blue-collar jobs and white-collar jobs is to innovate and be competitive. That's actually the best protection for Australian firms, but we've got to be able to tell that story through the Duluxes, the Nearstar in Port Pirie, where they've had the partnership with the workers and staged a turnaround, although it's energy security which is threatening them right now, through the BlueScopes, or little firms such as Melbourne Garages, which is a 12-person firm within my own electorate, which has created an entirely new business model and quadrupled over a 3-year period its business on the Mornington Peninsula. And so the innovation, meaning doing new things and continuously investing in doing new things, is the way to protect Australian jobs and to make them competitive. That's the way, with examples, to convey that.
Minister, thank you. Regrettably, we have to bring this session to a close, but can I again say to you how refreshing it is to find a minister knowledgeable in such a range of areas, but clearly a depth of knowledge about that. I think everyone here in this audience believes that your portfolio is going to be absolutely critical for Australia's future. Everyone in this audience is part of the conversation and are more than happy, I think, to embrace that conversation with you as you drive those next steps that you've outlined for us. We thank you for providing time for us this morning. Please thank Minister Greg Hunt.
Thank you very much. And look, the last thing that I'll say is there's an open invitation. Don't sit on suggestions or frustrations. If you have suggestions, criticisms, proposals, come to me, come to my office, come to the department. It's an open engagement. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Greg.